Hi, my name is Ken Davidian, and welcome to Season 2 of Organization Theory in Space. In this video series, I'm making one video for each chapter of the Oxford Handbook of Organizational Change and Innovation, 2nd edition, edited by Marshall Scott Poole and Andy Van de Ven. This video covers Chapter 31 of the Handbook, entitled Theories of Organizational Change as Assemblages. This chapter was written by the two editors of the handbook and describes how the four motors of change that we introduced way back in Chapter 1, including the evolutionary motor, the dialectic motor, the life cycle motor, and the teleologic motor, how they all get assembled into complex arrangements that better describe the realities of organizational change and innovation, better than any single motor on its own. This is a paradox that exists in most, if not all, academic fields. Practitioners need actionable items that are simple enough to implement and produce meaningful results, but at the same time, reality is complicated, so academics rely on increasingly complex models to improve the accuracy of their theories. The trick is then how to simplify this complexity in ways that make it practically usable. This chapter investigates three key aspects of change motor assemblages, namely the interlevel relationships described by the motors, the form of the change motor relationships, and the time scales of the different motors. Finally, each motor is inherently limited in how external inputs affect it, and these gaps can be filled through combinations of multiple motors. Reality tends to include multi-level effects, such as the influence of industry segment trends on individual organizations or the effect of regulatory actions on entire industries. However, research studies often focus on a single level of analysis. As a reminder, we're talking about the levels of analysis that were presented in most of Season 1, starting with Episode 3. The levels of analysis were also discussed extensively in Chapter 18 of this season. The result is that our understanding of multi-level phenomenon is limited. Three types of cross-level motor relationships have been identified, including nested, entangled, and aggregated. Nested motors result from motors at lower levels of analysis being tightly linked with motors at higher levels of analysis. Motors are entangled when motors at different levels influence each other but are not tightly linked, as in the case of nested motors. Entangled motors are not synchronized with each other, and there may be slippage or inefficiencies between them, but they do interact in meaningful ways. The influence between higher and lower level motors may change over time, too. Entangled motor relationships are difficult to theorize, so they're probably a lot more common than we currently think. Finally, aggregated motors appear when multiple lower level motors combine, and their effects accumulate to literally generate a higher level motor. The beauty of aggregated motors is that they allow researchers to explain the phenomenon of higher level motors. The way the four basic change motors combine in 16 different ways can be classified into four groups: single motor, dual motor, trimotor, and quad motor theories. These correspond respectively to the use of 1, 2, 3, or all four of the change motors in describing a given phenomenon. The four single motor theories represent main effects where no interactions exist. The other 12 combinations represent theories with interaction effects between the multiple motors. If one motor directly influences another motor, that's called a direct relationship. Direct relationships are unidirectional, where motor A affects motor B, and if motor B also affects motor A, that's called a recursive relationship. Both unidirectional or recursive relationships are direct relationships. Direct relationships can be reinforcing, where there's a positive influence of one motor on the others, or dampening if the influence is negative, or complex if the influence is nonlinear. Complexity is added to these relationship forms if the same motor has different effects on other motors across different levels of analysis. Indirect relationships are formed when another process mediates what would otherwise be a direct interaction. Types of indirect relationships include entrainment, where two motors on the same or different levels are operating independently but begin to operate in a coordinated fashion due to some external input or influence. And another type of indirect relationship is cyclical, where the impact of multiple motors alternate in having an impact on the change process. There are four ways in which timing is characterized regarding change motor interactions. The first is temporal velocity, or how quickly the change process takes place. How long the change process takes, controlling for variable velocity, is called the duration. Acceleration is a measure of how the change process velocity changes over time. If it speeds up, that's commonly called acceleration, and if it slows down, that's deceleration, or negative acceleration. Finally, the temporal orientation accounts for how influential the past, present, and future are on the overall change process. There are no hard and fast rules about temporal relationships among change motors. Although higher level organizations are commonly described as slow moving, as in shifts in cultural attitudes, institutional evolution, or environmental patterns, there are plenty of examples of higher level changes that occur very quickly, such as outbreak of wars or the onset of global pandemics. Ultimately, theorizing about real-world organizational change and innovation requires complex combinations of these four change motors, taking into account their influence over multiple levels, their interaction based on complex relationships, and the dynamic nature of the change. The need for complexity in innovation and organizational change theorizing is recognized not only by management theorists, but also by evolutionary economists like Malherbe, Nelson, Orsenigo, and Winter. This is where I think economists and management theorists can work together to help further our understanding of a super complex topic: organizational change, industry emergence, and innovation. Well, that's it for this chapter. I hope you found it as interesting as I did. And if you did, please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell so you won't miss any other video when it gets released. Thanks. OT in Space was produced by IRL, which stands for Impossible Research LLC. IRL conducts process research on the topics of innovation and industry emergence within the space sector context. IRL also offers services of organization theory consulting, research consulting, and STEAM outreach. This video is intended for educational purposes only.